Welcome to the Point of No Return podcast, a show at the intersection of technology and strategy. On this show, we interview industry leaders and experts to better understand how they think about strategy during this time of exponential progress.
Bonjour tout le monde, and welcome to the Point of No Return podcast. I'm really happy today to bring to you Caroline Codsi, President and Founder of Women in Governance. Caroline, for those that don't know her, is a remarkable figure. She grew up in a world that was shaped by war, essentially growing up in Lebanon during the war in the 1980s, and had a stellar career in the corporate world, having several important roles as VP and SVP in major organizations. But then in 2010, decided to found a nonprofit called Women in Governance, whose mission is to encourage women to develop their leadership, advance their career, and help them be present on boards. And she really dedicates her life in helping women have greater access and be able to contribute at the executive level and at board levels all across Canada in the corporate world. She's a remarkable figure, really has a deep passion for what she does, and really brings an entrepreneurial mindset to this nonprofit world. It was really great, wide-ranging conversations. We spoke about how she operates her nonprofit as a business, how she plans to encourage women to enter into STEM fields, and the ambitious goal of creating a industry-wide certification. She's an inspiring person, and I learned a ton, and I really hope that you enjoy the conversation that we had. Thank you. A natural place I'd like to start with you, Caroline, is how has war early in your childhood shaped your worldview? I'd be very curious to hear you.
Well, honestly, I think that a lot of what I've been achieving and building in the past couple of decades comes from what I've lived during my childhood. The quest for equality that has been central to my life, quite honestly, since my childhood, comes from that. Having seen a beautiful country destroyed by war-thirsty individuals who obviously had no respect for humans, let alone women, was my, I was only 7 years old when the war started. So at a very early age, I had to try to come to grasp with something as essential as why are people dying? Why is our country under siege? Why is there war? Why do we have to flee all the time? And understanding this, which I don't think anybody understands. I think to this date, a lot of people say if you think you understand the Lebanese conflict, then it wasn't explained properly, because it is just so confusing for everyone. But that is the paramount reason that, and I've only discovered this lately, just a few years ago when I did my first TED Talk, my TEDx of a few years ago. And the person who was organizing it was pushing me to say, why are you doing this? And I kept saying, well, for equality, for fairness, for equity, for our society, for the economy as well, because we very well know that there's a positive impact on financial performance when women can thrive. But she kept pushing me until I finally realized that I was actually doing this because as a child, in war-torn Lebanon, trying to understand what was happening and feeling so, incapable of doing anything about it. I really decided that, today I have a voice and I'm going to use it. The other thing I would say about how the war has impacted me as an adult today, and I will look at this in a very positive way, is that a lot of my resilience, my strength, my courage, the way that I overcome my fears comes from that period of life. To me, that is completely obvious. When sometimes I have women who come up to me and say, tell me how you did it, I want to do the same, I find it difficult to really say, here's my recipe, just replicate it. I don't think it's possible. I can definitely give a lot of tips on how to overcome your fears and just go for what you're passionate about and what you believe in, and you have to believe in yourself first and foremost. But I think honestly that some of the things that I've lived through, especially when at age 17, I was all alone in Paris, no parents and no money. I think it's a swim or sink situation that will shape anyone into hopefully a leader or someone who's just not going to make it okay in life.
Yeah, and I think it also puts risk taking into a whole different perspective, right? Where it's like, okay, like I want to start my own business, and what does that mean? And like, I don't have any financial support. You're like, well, you live in a Western country where it's like, okay, fine. Even if you quote unquote fail, well, you're not going to turn around. There's going to be bombs falling on your head. Like I often get that question. It's like, oh, was it hard leaving a job to start something? It's like, not really. It's not Syria, right? Like, so, but at the same time, so that experience helped build a thick skin and a sort of resilience for you to say, okay, you know what, like I could probably, tackle more challenges and try and change the world to a certain extent. And I want to go into the world changing part. But before then, so like as, when you're, at a formative age, what made you decide, okay, well, I want to go into, the corporate world. I want to go into business.
Well, to me, it seemed to be the best fit. When I arrived here in Canada, I was completely amazed at the big towers and the buzz in the corporate world and successful, we would see more successful men than women, but I was very excited to see the successful women, in a business suit with a briefcase. And to me, that was what I wanted to replicate. I wanted to feel that success. And so at first it was very, in a quest for I would say, very capitalistic vision of making it in North America, that it was the only way to go. In my opinion. So when I got my first job, when I arrived here, and I was in one of those big towers downtown, it was like a dream come true. But I was far from just imagining what was going to unfold, because I obviously started in a very, very low, very junior position as I was still studying. But to me, that was the first step of a very, very long ladder that I was already foreseeing, that I already imagined in my head I was going to be at the top. There was no doubt.
Without looking at it like as a recipe, because I don't think it's a recipe, did you have any like guiding principles or things that you said, okay, these are going to be the tenets that I use to help build my career and have, quote unquote success?
I didn't have principles per se, but I can tell you what guided me, because at the time, had you asked me, I would have said, no, I have no idea. I don't know. But today, when I reflect back on the past quarter of a century, I can say what it is that I did and that gave me the success that I had. And I would say one of the elements is my authenticity and my audacity. Something that at the time in the corporate world, people were frowning upon. I got so many coaching sessions around that, as to not be such an open book, as to not say everything that I think, as to not be so forceful. So that I thought was quite interesting, and I had these conversations at a very young age with people in the leadership teams of my organizations, where they said, you are such an important element to our team, but if you want to make it to the top, there are things that you're going to have to tone down. There are things that you cannot say or cannot do. You have to be cautious of this or that. And I deliberately decided to say, no, that's not how I'm going to do it. If you don't like my style, then fire me. Obviously, they wouldn't, because I was in business development for a long time and bringing about 3 to 4 times the revenues of the next person on the team. So that gave me a huge, I would say a huge uphand on anybody else, where they would have wanted me to be shaped differently according to their standards, according to what they've always seen and thought that this is how you should behave. And it's interesting because, I look 25 or 20 years later at certain things that I used to always say, it's okay to share with employees. It's okay to let them know the context or why we're doing this or where we're going or how their piece intricates within the whole larger scheme. But at the time, there was a lot of discussions around, the division between, a hierarchy that needed to be a lot more strict, and a distance between employees and management, which I think today we are in a completely different leadership style that completely fits who I am today and who I've always been. So for me, I'm laughing today.
Yeah, you're a bit ahead of your time, right? It was almost like, well, I don't need to follow the playbook. I'll just be who I am, which I think today fits more with everyone's worldview, right?
Well, exactly. Yeah. But it's just funny how at the time it was different. And interestingly enough, a few months ago, one of those coaches came to visit me. She lives in Toronto and came to visit me at one of my events at the Ritz-Carlton. And she mentioned that to me. She said, do you remember when I was talking to you about certain things you needed to change and you were telling me no way? And she says, well, you were right. But, it takes a lot of guts, right? At that time when you're in your, 30s and you're trying to make a name for yourself and people who are 20 years older than you are telling you that you're making a mistake and this is how you should actually behave. And you're just choosing to ignore what they say because your gut tells you otherwise. And, I guess I was, because of the fact that I was a revenue generator, that kind of gave me the edge that I needed to say, listen, this is who I am. And, if you're not happy, there's 12 other companies that are dying to hire me anyway. So I stuck to my, held to my ground.
Yeah. Performance matters, right? So it's like, as long as you're performing, you get to choose basically. And then, so what led you to leave, I imagine you had a very profitable job working in the corporate world and to want to decide, hey, I'm going to launch this nonprofit in this like obscure sector that no one's talking about. So curious to hear the genesis story.
So it's almost 10 years ago. I founded Women in Governance in 2010. And it all came from my own experience in the corporate world. So as I mentioned, a quarter of a century in the corporate world, my career ascended in a very speedy way. I reached levels of, director, vice president, executive vice president, and I was very often the only woman at the decision-making table. And that really struck me, and I wasn't prepared for that. I really thought that in Canada, we had gender equality everywhere, in every sector, at every level. And the more I was maturing and my career was progressing, and the more I was realizing that the situation was actually really alarming, and less than 5% of CEOs are women in Canada. And not a lot of people at the time when I was starting to make these realizations and do some research around this in 2009, people were not talking about this. It wasn't, it's become sort of a buzz theme, and, whether it's the Canadian government or the French government, or the G7, who are all saying that it's central to their policies and to their strategy today. But at the time that I was really alarmed and wanting to sensitize the population, it wasn't as hot a topic. So I began by organizing events, inviting influential men and women to attend and to speak, to be on panels, on fireside chats, etc. So for 5 years, this is what Women in Governance was about, from 2010 to 2015. In 2015, when it was our 5th anniversary, I launched a mentoring program, which is very successful. We're going to have our 5th cohort this January. 40 women who are VPs in the corporate world are chosen every year to be mentored by a current or past CEO, male or female, or chair of board. And, this is a concrete way of not only inspiring women through the events, but actually supporting them in how you get to the next level. You actually go through that ultimate glass ceiling. And in 2016, I started having this vision of a parity certification, because I thought I can have an influence on the women and their capacity to come out of their comfort zone and take risks and move their career forward, etc. I can have an influence on men and tell them to be an ambassador of the cause and tell them to support women, to open the door for the women. But if I don't do anything with the corporate world to change certain policies of organizations that have been built by men for men, where they're now saying women are welcome without touching an iota of what is, the policies in place, then that's not going to work. So at the time, I decided to build a committee to, put in place such a certification. We approached McKinsey & Company, who accepted our invitation to support us pro bono and build this with us. Took us a year. And then in 2017, when we were ready to launch the certification and approach organizations, I was executive vice president of one of Canada's largest medical expertise firms. I had a very big job, very lucrative, as you mentioned earlier, but also very demanding. So I had a decision to make at that point. The reputation of women in governance had become quite striking, and not only locally but nationally and internationally. I was invited to speak in 10 different countries over a span of 2 years, and I mean faraway countries. I spoke in New Delhi, I spoke in Bahrain, I spoke in Reykjavik, in St. Petersburg, in Paris, in Lima, in Casablanca, etc. So at that time, I decided to resign from my job. It also happened at a time where my daughter became a lawyer and decided to leave the house. Realized that, do I really need such a huge salary? I mean, I love money like anybody else and happy to fill my bank account. But at the end of the day, my passion is not filling my bank account. My passion is doing something that I believe in, is having an impact and seeing the change that I'm bringing in corporate Canada every day. So I made that decision, not lightly at all, but I made it knowing that, this was the time to do it, because we can always wait and there's always lots of concerns, and there's always also people to ask you if you're out of your mind, because I've had a lot of that, of people saying, really? But your job is, you're so lucky to have a job like this and the money, and, why are you taking a risk like this? And I said, well, what is the worst that could happen? Let's say I do this and it doesn't work, which there is no chance that it's not going to work, because I believe in it and I will make everybody else believe in it. So it's going to work. But let's say something happens and it doesn't have the magnitude that I expected it to. So I will just get another job, right? So why worry? Why worry? I am so thrilled to say that 2 years later, I quit my job about 2.5 years ago, or almost. We've got 10 full-time staff, 5 men and 5 women, and this number is growing almost weekly these days, because we're expanding into the rest of Canada, especially Toronto, which is taking up a lot of our time. But all the head offices are there and we're having great success. They're really rolling the red carpet for us. It's been amazing. But now we're also penetrating the US. So we've got a lot of operations that are going to be, launched in New York in the coming, weeks and months. And, sky is the limit, quite frankly.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack in what you said, Caroline, and maybe a few points I want to go back to, which I think speak to me, is the notion of, well, if it doesn't work out, your value, if anything, has gone up because you experimented something and you fail. And I think for me, it's a very important point to mention, is that, the world doesn't end. And there's also a question of timing. It's like, why wait, right? Like the world is not going to wait for you, right?
Exactly.
On the perfect context. And then, so you found Women in Governance. I'd like to maybe understand its mission and then also its business model. I understand you're a nonprofit, but how you generate traction.
Right. And that's super important. And I think that more nonprofits should take this approach. I run Women in Governance like I used to run the businesses that I managed in the past, because I mentioned being in business development for many years, but the past 9 years, last 9 years of my corporate career, I was managing profit and loss for 2 major organizations. So I know how to increase profit. I know how to decrease expenses. I know how to attract employees. I know how to focus on certain fields that are more lucrative. And this is exactly how I manage women in governance. And I think that's one of the keys to our success. The other key to our success is the fact that I have a huge network in the corporate world, being from that world, being an executive in that world. And I have the credibility of a woman who herself firsthand has experienced the glass ceiling. So these two elements have allowed me to take my vision, my mission, and make it a very lucrative business. Even if it's a nonprofit, we have year one made $1 million. Purely corporate money, not a dollar from government. And year two, we're probably going to increase that by 50%, maybe more. So it's crazy how quickly it's going. We're probably actually going to add a for-profit arm to this, with different services that we might add to our offering. But I can tell you that, I haven't slowed down. I am not going to slow down. My ideal is for this to become a global movement, to have offices everywhere or whatever the offshoot, whatever it would look like. And, I really need the support, not only from, the Quebec, the Canadians, the, Ontarians, but also what we're seeing now is in the United States, although there are so many women organizations, in Canada as well, there's 400 in Canada. It's huge. Why is it that some are at the top 1, 2, 3 and the others are struggling? But I strongly believe that it is because of the way that certain organizations function. They wait for government money. They, don't have the, stamina that is required to drive the teams. I can tell you here, people come in early, they leave late. Everybody works very hard and they're not super well paid. They're fairly paid, I would say, but they wouldn't go anywhere else. They are so engaged. People, will see something on television at night and text me. They will do research during their vacation and send me what they found. So there's this whole passion that is, you can feel it. You can sense it.
It's amazing. Well, it's amazing. Yeah. And so the growth has been spectacular as well. So yeah, very, 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 very well done. So maybe explain to me the business model. So like how exactly do corporations benefit from your services?
So, we have several revenue streams. First of all, I mentioned the parity certification, which is on its way to being, our most, lucrative, field. So organizations, to get the certification, it seems to be very little money compared to other programs that are out there because they'll typically pay $10,000 for a 3-year period. They certify year 1 and they recertify year 2 and 3. We want to see progress. And that supports them throughout this entire period, with, reports on their results, with best practices, recommendations, networking events that they attend at no additional cost, etc. So we're really building a community of like-minded organizations that want to be supported on the path to parity. I mentioned that this year we've got about 50 organizations, and we are really looking at doubling year over year. In 2017, we had 17 organizations. In 2018, we had 31. This year we have 50, and this is just going to continue growing because these organizations, for the most part, are in a 3-year program. So that means that next year, if we go get the same number, it would be amazing to have 75, 80, 100 or more organizations until all the top 500 organizations in this country have the certification, which also I think, is something that will become a must more and more as our young, people, our students graduating will be asking these questions to a potential employer. How is it for a man or a woman to progress in this organization? Do you have women in governance parity certification? Why am I interested as a man? Well, as a man, you're also interested to know that if the organization believes that men and women are entitled to contributing at the same levels, then men are also responsible to contribute at home. So giving them time off, flex time, with their children, and parental leaves is going to be an important element. And these are things that we look at also in the certification. We look at everything from entry level all the way to the board.
And what would you say, how would you describe your current challenges in growing the business, right? If we call it a business, because that's how you seem to approach it.
I would say that one of the challenges is that we were having with the certification is that a lot of organizations were coming in for 1 year to put their logo up there, and then they figured, oh, I did what I had to do. So it's really getting them to understand that it's a continuous progress, it's a continuous work. And also, if we stop looking at it, you might actually move backwards. It is so easy to regress when it comes to these questions, especially at a time where the far right, populist far right is rising, and feminism is actually being seen as something that is negative. So we really need to have men and women working hard together. This is for us our motto. It's men and women. It's a society movement. It's not a feminist movement or a women's movement, although we are feminist, because it just means that we are for equality between men and women, nothing else. Otherwise, we also have our mentoring programs, our governance trainings, and our major events that are revenue generators.
Yeah, it's very interesting. And I imagine you also think about and you talk about a lot about the industry as a whole, right? So it's like kind of maybe two questions, but bundled into one is how do you think, industry policies should change to allow this? And is it possible, or like the challenges there? And also advice you would give to young women entering the industry, right? That are looking for these opportunities that may or may not be there because of, like you mentioned, the aforementioned glass ceiling.
Right. So yes, two distinct questions. So to answer the latter about young women coming into, the corporate world, I think there's a few things that need to be kept in mind. First of all, there are certain typical male qualities that are not natural for us that we absolutely must develop. So the whole risk-taking piece is a good example. The capacity to speak loud enough in a meeting to be heard. The audacity to tell a man who is just repeating your idea that thank you, Charles, for repeating my idea, and I'm glad that you've liked it and that you're amplifying it. And I actually also encourage men and women who see this happening to do that, because I think all the mansplaining and the man-interrupting needs to go. So women need to work on certain aspects where men excel. Networking is another very good example. Women work very hard, and once they're done with their day, they run home, take care of the kids, and that's it. Men will look at the networking opportunities. They will go to an event. They will meet up with some executives of their organization. They will make sure that their profile is up at the top of the minds of any executive in the organization. They will talk about their achievements, even if their achievements are not that fabulous. And women, when they do amazing things, then they're ashamed to talk about it because they don't want people to think that they're bragging. But they should brag, but it's not bragging. They just be proud of what you've done and talk about it so that people know and they think about you for an opportunity. On the other hand, there are some very typical female qualities that we have naturally that are more difficult for men to develop. And I don't want to put everybody in the same bucket. In general, I would say women tend to be more, have more empathy. They tend to have a more democratic type of leadership, to be more, active listeners. These are the type of qualities that are really, really, really needed in today's leadership. They are more authentic. They are more transparent. They, take at heart their teams. They do things that go beyond the call of duty for the organization. And that is amazing. They're not selfish. They give a lot. They are extremely detail oriented. They're super well prepared before a board meeting or any important meeting. And this is wonderful. So if they could, on top of that, add to their skill set some of those more typically male qualities, they would be the best leader any organization has ever seen.
Yeah. Yeah. So going back maybe now to the first question, right?
Yes.
So how does industry change?
So it's very slow. It's really a lot of, I would say, a lot of examples that need to be showcased. And this is why we do what we do. So when there's an organization that has the platinum certification, we will give them, a microphone at the gala. They will share in front of 800 people what it is that they've done that sets them apart, and why is it important for them to have more women in decision-making bodies, how they've achieved it, and just inspire other organizations. I strongly believe that, you can't not be against virtue. Everybody says that they want more women in their organizations and that they want them everywhere, including in decision-making bodies. But certain industries, it is true, are unfortunately less open to women because there are less female graduates in certain fields. That is a reality that we need to, deal with at a more earlier stage. Like, for instance, speaking to girls in school about STEM disciplines, encouraging them to see some role models in certain disciplines that they may not have thought of, because school is where it all starts. When they come to women in governance events and they're 30, 40, 50 years old, they're not going to become an engineer if they're not already an engineer. So there needs to be a lot of work much, much earlier. And our role at Women in Governance is to showcase models of women in different capacity. And we always say, if she can see it, she can be it. And it's essential. Yeah.
It's been an amazing conversation, Caroline. I guess we could probably talk for another hour, but I want to be respectful of your time. Maybe one or two last questions would be, is how big is the opportunity for women in governance? Like, what's your vision for your organization?
So I think that if all goes according to plan, the certification will become such a norm, a global norm, that hopefully governments will require that any supplier that wants a substantial contract needs to be certified. You need to walk the talk. It is very easy to say that as a government, we believe women should play an important role. As a company, it is important that women play a role. Well, you know what? Just show it. And the way you show it is, as a company, you certify. As a government, you deal with these organizations. I was just reading about Microsoft in the States. They don't accept to have any of their suppliers that don't offer parental leave to their employees. So they're saying, we want to align as a supplier, you need to align with our values. We want to be aligned with our suppliers. Otherwise, we will pick somebody else. It's the power of the purse. There's also the Canada Pension Plan Investment Board in Toronto, who's one of our partners. They vote against boards that don't have women. They say, we are not going to invest any money in a board that doesn't believe in diversity, because we know for a fact that you are not going to have the best performance you can have with an all male pale stale board. That's not going to happen. So you're not going to see our money. And these are initiatives that actually have an impact. So we amplify these initiatives. We encourage more organizations to think that way. And this is how it's just going to become something that is so ingrained within our society that even when there's a rise of populism, and even if there are, probably still 100 or more, or 208 years, according to the World Economic Forum, before we can reach equality, I really believe that with initiatives like this, we can accelerate really fast pace, and reach that, hopefully before I die.
It's amazing, Caroline. I think the two things you talk about, like I work at a strategy firm, and things we always talk about are values, right? So you spoke about values and aligning incentives. And also I love your big, hairy, ambitious goal, right? Every single company being certified. So maybe one final question, Caroline, where can people find out more about women in governance and the amazing work you guys are doing?
So womeningovernance.org. in French, la gouvernance au féminin.org. And of course, our social media. We are on LinkedIn, on Facebook, on Twitter, on Instagram, and we'd love to hear from you.
Amazing. Thank you so much for your time, Caroline.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Point of No Return podcast. Never miss an episode by clicking on the subscribe button on iTunes or Google Play.